Hey guys, welcome back, or if you're new here, hi, welcome, I'm Georgia. On my platforms, I focus on unsolved true crime, missing people, unsolved cases, unidentified people, just generally cold cases, trying to bring as much awareness as I can. And today we're going to be focusing on a Jane Doe case, specifically that of Smurfette Jane Doe or Jane Houston Doe. The skeletal remains of Smurfette Jane Doe were found on October 16th, 2012. I always get a lot of discussion in my comments over whether it's skeletal or skeletal. I think it's a British versus US thing. I personally say skeletal. I think they're both right. The remains were found in Houston in Texas near Walters Road behind Fallbrook Church, and this is a fairly recent case from 2012, so chances are there's someone out there alive who holds all the answers here. People out there who might be able to provide some answers as to who Jane Doe is, or some information as to her death. It's always really sort of encouraging, I suppose, when you cover recent cases, because you're much more likely to find the answers for something that happened 11 years ago rather than something that happened 40 years ago. The remains were found discarded like rubbish. Jane Doe was folded in the fetal position, double bagged in black plastic bin bags. According to an article on Chron.com by Lisa Falkenberg, she was found discarded alongside soda bottles, old sneakers, and a broken bird bath. Literally just thrown away like rubbish or trash for my American viewers. She was found behind the church, like I said, in a gated gravel driveway leading to an oil field. It looked as if she was rubbish that had kind of been just fly tipped, just thrown out of a car. And although she was found in mid-October, it was estimated that she'd been there for about 3 to 6 weeks, making it likely that she had died in September. Although her remains were skeletal, this was Texas. At the end of summer, the heat very much would have sped up the decomposition here, especially seeing that she was inside plastic. From what I can gather, she was only found when somebody actually called the authorities about the smell. You can imagine how badly this smelt. According to the Doe Network, the state of remains were not recognisable, and due to the skeletal state, her cause of death has never been determined, but there wasn't any sort of huge trauma to any of the bones. This case is just immediately sad, isn't it? Somebody being discarded like rubbish, like their life didn't mean anything. But it's even worse when you find out that she's estimated to have been a child. Doe Network states her estimated age as being between 15 and 17, but other sources do state that she may have been even younger. Jane Doe was biologically female. She was likely mixed race, so white and black. She was 4'7" to 5'3". Her weight was unknown. Her hair was a very dark brown. It was wavy or curly in shoulder length, and it was held back from her face with a standard bobby pin. Her eye colour was also unknown due to the state of decomposition. It's very interesting that even now it's reported that Jane Doe was likely mixed race, so white and black, but they do have her DNA on file, so surely that should have been actually tested by now. They should know for sure that she was mixed race and not just likely. I don't really have the answer there. Jane Doe was noted to have a very small build, and to add yet another layer of sadness to this, growth arrest lines in her thigh bones have indicated that she may have been malnourished or suffered a pretty bad illness as a child. She also only had 22 ribs instead of the usual 24. And as well as this, she had asymmetry to her skull that may have been very visible in her face. This could have indicated an illness or some kind of syndrome. Now, on Web Sleuths and on Reddit, I've seen quite a lot of people saying that she may have had something called Chiari malformation as well, thanks to a possible defect that they say was found at the base of her skull. But I couldn't find any original source stating that she had this defect, so I do think all of that is just speculation, but I may be wrong. Chiari malformation is where the cerebellum, so part of the brain at the back of the head, basically bulges through the normal opening in the skull where it joins the spinal canal, putting pressure on the brain and the spinal cord. The symptoms of this can range from being very mild to the point that some people won't even realise they've got this until adulthood, to pretty severe neck pain, balance problems, poor hand-eye coordination, scoliosis, numbness of your hands and feet, speech problems. It could keep going on. Again, all of this is just speculation. I don't know for sure that Jane Doe definitely had this, but if somebody potentially knew a child in the Houston area who had this, who disappeared one day, then I feel like it's worth just throwing out there. Like I said previously, Jane Doe's DNA is available, which does raise some pretty big questions for me. Have they analysed her DNA to find any genetic abnormalities or a diagnosis of anything? Is all this just speculation? This case is one that's listed on the Identifinders website as one that they are currently working on, so forensic genetic genealogy is very much in progress in this case. And Identifinders is amazing. It was founded by Dr. Colleen Fitzpatrick, a name that so many of us in this field will know so well. Dr. Fitzpatrick is an internationally recognised forensic genealogist and a pioneer in her field. You might recognise her name from the Somerton Man identification, which she was very closely involved in. She was also a co-founder of the DNA Doe Project, again something that we know so well. So this truly is an awesome, incredible woman. And this very much does give me huge hope in Jane Doe's case. I have no doubt they're going to find her name, and probably they'll find it fairly soon. But a final burst of coverage in this case will no doubt help the investigation, because this is obviously going to be a criminal investigation as well. We're not just looking for her identity, we're also looking for her murderer. I mean, at the very least there was unlawful disposal of a body here, but more likely than not, this was a case of murder. So even if Identifinders can find Jane Doe's identity, her name, that doesn't mean they're going to be able to find who was responsible for her death. Back in October 2012, so the same month in which Jane Doe was found, Jennifer Love, the forensic anthropology director of Harris County where she was found, said that her office had a very high success rate in identifying skeletal remains. So far that year alone, in 2012, there have been 12 such cases come into the office, and only 3, including Jane Doe, remained unidentified as of the end of October. Now, I can't speak for the other 2 cases here, but obviously 10.5 years later now, Jane Doe is still unidentified. Love said at this point, back in October 2012, that her and her staff will be checking the girl's DNA against national missing persons databases, which we can probably now presume was unfruitful. She also said that no one had reported somebody of Jane Doe's description as missing, nor did anyone come forward when the media reported on the body being found. Particularly interesting, as it's thought that this was a child, a minor. Somebody must be missing her. I mean, in general, parents usually do tend to report their children as missing when they disappear. The fact that she likely wasn't reported as missing leads us into quite a few theories. She may have been older than her body suggested. She may not have even been from the Houston area and therefore might have been a runaway from elsewhere. I mean, we've seen time and time again the parents try to report teenagers as missing, it's not taken seriously because they're thought to be runaways, and no reports ever made, and that's that. That could especially be the case if Jane Doe was towards the older end of the approximate age, if she was older than 15 to 17. Or Jane Doe may have been homeless for whatever reason, kicked out by her family, and therefore they obviously wouldn't have noticed if she was murdered. They wouldn't have reported her as missing if they're the ones to kick her out. The evidence in this case, the growth arrest lines in the thigh bones, do suggest that the girl may have either lived a childhood of poverty, illness, or just plain mistreatment. She didn't grow as would be expected of your average 15 to 17-year-old girl. As Dr. Sharon Derrick, the medical examiner for Harris County, said, this Doe appeared to be in ill health. She had to have some sort of nutritional defect as she was growing up. She was around 5 feet, but her bones were very small. She had a very small frame. However, her dental work proves that at some point Jane Doe was very cared for. She had a very pronounced overbite and fillings in 3 of her lower molars. This dental work was fairly old, but it was there. However, she also had severe tooth decay, her crowns of teeth 3 and 4 had been destroyed by cavities, and their sockets were very infected. Teeth 1, 2, 16, 17 and 34 had either never developed, perhaps as part of the sort of syndrome or illness that she suffered with, or they'd been removed and their sockets had just sort of fully healed over. At some point in her life, she definitely had carers who ensured that her teeth were looked after. But then something happened and all of that just sort of fell away. I'm kind of just spitballing here, but maybe she had mentally ill parents or physically ill parents who started struggling to care for her. Perhaps she was a runaway for whatever reason, and then once she ran away, she couldn't afford to care for her own dental health. There is a lot of speculation that Jane Doe may have been in the foster system, which maybe she ran away from for whatever reason, perhaps due to mistreatment. This may well have been a girl who was mistreated for her entire life, taken away from her biological parents for whatever reason, and then shipped from foster family to foster family. And sadly, abuse within foster families is much more common than you would want it to be. So many people are doing it for the wrong reason. Obviously, there are amazing foster families out there, but there are also the ones who are not so amazing. Maybe no one who was supposed to care for this child cared for her, or perhaps they did at one point but just stopped caring. Maybe she was in and out of foster care, hence the sporadic dental care. Maybe Jane Doe was reported as missing by the foster family, but then she aged out of the system and therefore her disappearance may have just got lost. Maybe CPS just stopped caring. According to an article on KXAN.com, a third of Texas foster care runaways remain missing. According to what I've read online, the Texas foster care system is particularly notorious for not keeping track of kids. But that is obviously just hearsay. I don't have personal experience in that. Perhaps this all could be combined with the theory that Jane Doe may have suffered with some form of illness. She may have been disabled and a family found it difficult to care for her. Again, all too often caregivers struggle to care for disabled kids. They've got no support themselves, and therefore the kids can deal with horrendous levels of abuse. The abnormality of the skull and the 2 missing ribs very much could suggest the presence of something, but exactly what eludes me. Those were definitely genetic rather than caused by abuse. The skull and the ribs, 100% genetic. We don't know how much her illness would have affected her everyday life. She might have been generally unaffected by it, or it might have been very, very severe. But if Jane Doe was disabled, whether that's physically or mentally, she may have struggled to care for her own teeth, hence the levels of decay. Maybe she reached a certain age, her parents or caregivers, whoever they were, stopped sort of caring for her teeth themselves, thought it was on her, and she just couldn't do it for whatever reason. If Jane Doe was killed by her caregivers, whether that's biological, foster, whoever, then this very much makes sense as to why they wouldn't have come forward identifying her. Jane Doe had a lot of identifying features, especially with her face probably presenting as asymmetrical, but yet no one's come forward. Is this maybe a child who wasn't in the local community, who was hidden away for whatever reason? Her clothing was also very identifiable and is actually one of the reasons why investigators feel like she was younger rather than just a very small adult. Although I still think it is very possible that she was an adult and would make more sense as to why no one's reported her as missing. Jane Doe was found wearing a cartoon shirt, a t-shirt with a cartoon on it, and they were, if I remember correctly, actually quite popular around this time, fashionable even. You could go into any sort of adult fashion store and buy t-shirts for adults with cartoons on them, like kids' cartoons. So I think if they're sort of placing the fact that she must have been a child based on this sort of t-shirt, I don't think there's much in that, if I'm being honest. So this t-shirt was a blue-green short sleeve t-shirt with no size on it, again, so no indication of whether it was adult or kids, with a cartoon drawing of Smurfette on the front, the first female Smurf, Smurfette. She's picking daisies with the text, he smurfs me not, surrounding her. Jane Doe was also wearing tan cargo pants in a size 5, a black bra in the size 34C, and pink thong underwear. The underwear here suggests that perhaps she was older than sort of 15. A pink thong is fairly adult, but maybe that's speaking more to my own experience as a teenager than Jane Doe's herself. I think generally nowadays, where teenagers do tend to present as much older, in 2012, when I would have been 17 myself, so I think me and Jane Doe were most likely around the same-ish sort of age, teenagers didn't present as old as they do now. So I think maybe a 15-year-old, maybe they would have worn a hot pink thong. Probably. You can't discount it, but I think it's more likely that she might have been towards the older end of the spectrum, or even older. I think back to when I was 15, again around the same age as Jane Doe, it was very much the orange Dream Matte Mousse foundation and the concealer lips and the bright blue eyeshadow, and it wasn't a vibe, but it was the vibe at the time. But generally people looked much younger than a 15-year-old would do now. And I know it's only 10 years ago and it wasn't that long ago, or 13 years ago, but I'm just trying to like bring you back to the time period that this was in. And yes, older teenagers very much would have worn cartoon t-shirts. I remember going into like the emo stores in town and that was just the kind of vibe. I was never an emo, but a lot of my friends were. She was also wearing no jewellery and had no additional personal items found alongside her, so this is kind of all they had to go on. By February 1st, 2013, isotope testing had taken place in this case, which suggested that Jane Doe very much may have been from the Houston area, so she likely wasn't from outside the state. She likely grew up in Texas, and the results of the testing was very consistent with Austin, San Antonio, or somewhere in north central Texas. Isotope testing is a fascinating thing in the field of forensics. Essentially, your body leaves a kind of map of your life, a map of where you've been and spent time, of the food you eat, the water you drink, the elements you breathe in every day. It leaves a kind of imprint on your bones, on your teeth, on your hair. You can narrow down pretty effectively where people have spent time in their lives. Of course, this isn't foolproof. There's always the chance that the soil your food is grown in Texas, for example, might be incredibly similar to the soil in, I don't know, Arizona, random states, don't take that as fact. But it's a very good starting point. This is a very brief and cursory overview of what isotope testing is. It is a lot more complicated than that, but that is it in a nutshell. According to the National Institute of Justice website, isotope testing from hair samples was able to predict the sex of a person with 94% accuracy, age group with 83% accuracy, and region of origin with 61% accuracy. Like I said, it's not perfect, but it is something. 61% is better than 0%. And that's just with hair. Apparently it's even more successful in teeth because of how well teeth last. Tooth enamel is less susceptible to chemical change and decay following death, so isotopic evidence from teeth can produce much more reliable results than from hair and even from bone. The mineralized portions of teeth are 20 to 15% higher than of bone, meaning that essentially they grab onto the all-important isotopes much more effectively than bone, than hair. Now, I don't know if they tested teeth, hair or bone in Jane Doe's case here. I just think all this is fascinating. But what this testing shows is Jane Doe is most likely from the area in which she was found, where her discovery would have been shared in the media, although it doesn't seem like it was a huge case in the media, it was there for a bit. So that makes it more interesting than ever that she was never identified, that nobody ever came forward saying this girl, this teenager, has gone missing. The National Centre for Missing and Exploited Children took on Jane Doe's case and they created this composite sketch. For my YouTube viewers, you can see it on screen. For my podcast listeners, please just go and Google Smurfette Jane Doe. Carl Koppelman, who generally produces quite accurate composite sketches, produced this sketch. You can quite clearly see the facial asymmetry if you're looking for it, but it's not too obvious. It's not very in your face. And his drawing is an approximation of appearance based on CT scan facial reconstruction. I do personally suspect that Jane Doe's identification may lead fairly quickly to the discovery of her murderer, but that also might not be the case, which is another reason why it's important to share her story far and wide, even if identifiers are already on this case. They've been working on this since late 2021, it seems. They might be sitting on an announcement, or this case might have proven to be a very complicated one. If you live in Houston or the general area, San Antonio or Austin, please share this episode, talk to people, put her reconstruction photo on Facebook, share Jane Doe's story. It does seem like law enforcement are actively working on this case as well, or at least when they have a lead come in, they sort of see it through. Rule-outs are being added to NamUs on a fairly regular basis, and there are currently 15 missing person exclusions on her NamUs page, so they are looking into this. If you have any information about this case or the victim's identity, you can call the Harris County Institute of Forensic Sciences. I'll leave the number down below, or of course you can just contact the local law enforcement in Harris County. Thank you so much for tuning in today. Like I said, if you live in any of the areas that I've mentioned in today's episode, then please make sure you share her story as far as you can. And I will see you in the next one. Bye guys.